The north and the west will see further outbreaks rain on and off through the day, even some thunderstorms for western Scotland, but the southeast stays dry and it'll be hot on Sunday with 30 Celsius possible. Monday and Tuesday sees cooler conditions.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GBNews.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GBNews.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christies, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion, mine, theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 1 minute past 4. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The government says a legal dispute with the European Union will not fix the problems facing the people and businesses of Northern Ireland. It comes after the EU launched fresh legal action against the UK over claims it's failing to comply with the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says the British government has ignored repeated calls to reconsider its position on the trading arrangements. MP Andrew Mitchell told GB News he's dismayed by the action.
I do think that the EU have been really quite unhelpful over the issue of Northern Ireland and the protocol, and that the programme that the British government put forward of red and green routes through customs issues was the right approach. And I'm very dismayed indeed that it has now come to a legal case.
The Port of Dover boss has called a lack of staff at the French border immensely frustrating as travellers face lengthy queues at the start of their summer getaway. Doug Bannister says he can't guarantee the backlog will be cleared in the coming days, but staff are doing all they can to address the issues. The port declared a critical incident with traffic jams of up to 6 hours and holidaymakers being urged to consider staying away. Meanwhile, go-slow fuel price protests are causing yet more traffic jams across the UK. In other travel news, British Airways workers, mostly check-in staff at Heathrow Airport, have voted to call off strike action. Members of the Unite Union and GMB Union had voted for industrial action in a row over a pay cut during the pandemic. However, after extensive negotiations, the company made a new offer, which members have now accepted. The Unison Union has announced that it will appeal against a new law allowing employers to use agency staff during strikes. The changes mean businesses will soon be able to use agency workers to fill staffing gaps caused by industrial action. It follows government efforts to repeal trade union laws which previously restricted the action that employers could take. Recent weeks have seen a series of strikes across multiple sectors. A former Irish soldier has been sentenced to 15 months in jail for being a member of the so-called Islamic State. Ex-Defence Forces member Lisa Smith was convicted of being part of the terrorist group by Dublin's non-jury Special Criminal Court. The 40-year-old Islam convert was acquitted of a separate charge of financing terror. The two remaining Tory leadership hopefuls are trading blows over each other's tax plans. Rishi Sunak's warning against what he calls a huge borrowing spree. It's in response to Liz Truss's plan to cut taxes by at least £30 billion a year. She says her proposals are affordable and the former Chancellor's tax rises will choke off growth. Professor of Economics at Cardiff University, Patrick Minford, who was also a former advisor to Margaret Thatcher, told GB News he agrees with Miss Truss.
When the Treasury spent $500 billion on COVID, because obviously it had to, it then turned around and said, but you can't spend any more, in the coming years than that will put up borrowing, because we can't do that sort of thing. And of course, transparently, that is nonsense, having spent $500 billion on COVID.
Health experts are warning long NHS waiting lists are forcing patients to pay for healthcare out of their own pockets. New figures from the private healthcare network show patients paid for almost 70,000 private treatments themselves between October and December last year. That's up 39% on the previous year. The number of people in England waiting for hospital treatment climbed to a new record high of 6.6 million at the end of May. Turkey has brokered a deal to resume grain exports through the Black Sea. The agreement was signed this afternoon in Istanbul by Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the United Nations. The war has stalled Kyiv's exports, leaving some 20 million tonnes of grain stuck in silos and causing a global shortage. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says it will enable significant volumes of food to be exported. And an 11-year-old boy has been rescued after drifting more than a mile out to sea on an inflatable dinghy. Footage released by the RNLI shows the moment that volunteers found the boy floating alone in waters off the coast of Kent. His family called the Coast Guard after he was blown out to sea, with the volunteer crew at Dungeness quickly launching a search and rescue mission. What a relief. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Nana Akua.
So good afternoon. It is fast approaching 7 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. So the candidates have been whittled down to the final two, Truss and Sunak. Let's start with Rishi Sunak, the architect of the worst, most disconnected spring statement I've ever had the misfortune to witness. There lies his problem. He thought that reducing VAT on solar panels and heat pumps was a great saving, presumably because in his world, everybody has them. I don't know anyone with either. It is evident that he is out of touch with real people. He keeps banging on about his upbringing, telling us how his family built their business from scratch. Yes, this may be true, but they were economic migrants, and by the time he was born, they weren't short of a bob or two. He helped run a family pharmacy with his mum, which they apparently lived above, and his father was a doctor. Hello? How many people do you know that can afford to buy or live in prime real estate? And when have you ever seen a poor doctor or pharmacist? If you're in the business of peddling drugs, albeit perfectly legally, it's a very profitable business, as the makers of the COVID vaccines can tell you. How many jabs are we on now? He even went to Winchester, an exclusive private school. And if his spring statement was not evidence enough of his disconnect, he thought that it was OK to say that he doesn't have any working-class friends. The other day, he went to the Red Wall event and arrived in his 500-pound Prada shoes. To call him out of touch is basically a major understatement. And, of course, there are his policies, which focus on high tax. Now, Liz Truss, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. Unlike Slick Rishi, her delivery is marginally less wooden than John Major. She actually grew up in a working-class environment in Leeds. Her parents were left-wing activists, and she talks about a political journey. She doesn't need to pretend to be in touch because you can plainly see that she is. To her credit, she has struck up numerous trade deals despite voting Remain whilst Rishi voted Leave, and she has, by all counts, accepted the democratic mandate to leave the EU. She now says that she was wrong to vote Remain. How many people in your life do you know that are prepared to say they are wrong about anything? And as far as I can see it, she's put her heart and soul into getting the trade deals done. Dominic de Cummings described her as a hand grenade, which she called a compliment. He's not used to reverse psychology. His whole mantra relies on adverse reaction, which she simply didn't give him. She's been in the cabinet for longer than Rishi as well. So who do you trust? Look, if I had my own way, neither would get my vote because Boris is streets ahead of both of them. That is evident. But as that is not an option, I think the most telling part of this is that Rishi is backed by Dominic Cummings, the person who started the Boris vendetta, also Lazybones Raab, who stayed on holiday at the start of the Afghan withdrawal, and Jeremy Hunt, who failed to prepare the NHS properly for a pandemic. Truss, on the other hand, is backed by Nadine Dorries, who's calling the BBC to account, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who wants to scale down the civil service and get them back to the office, and Kemi Badenoch supporters appeared to be the ones that pushed Liz into second place. It's a no-brainer. In my view, Slick Rishi is way too slick. He even has his own Ready for Rishi sunscreen, which he gave to the press with the, quote, guaranteed protection against Labour. Maybe, but the real problem are his policies, and no amount of sunscreen will stop him from getting a roasting because of them. When I asked you, the GB News viewers, before the runners were declared, who you would like to see other than Boris, you overwhelmingly said Liz Truss. I can see why. In the end, this boils down to policy and who you believe is the true Conservative. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. Now, each Friday at 5, we'll put the spotlight on a particular guest or subject matter in my Friday Focus feature. Now, this week, I'm going to be looking at climate change as I'm trying to get to the bottom of what actually caused the wildfires. The record-breaking temperatures this week caused outbreaks across Europe, and here in the UK, the London Fire Brigade said that Tuesday was its busiest day since World War II, with a major incident declared. But is it really down to climate? The Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should we bring the armed forces in to police our borders? A damning new report has found the Home Office response to small boat crisis in the English Channel is, quote, ineffective and inefficient. The report also suggests that some migrants even entered the UK carrying guns and pocket knives, and is recommending a new model is desperately required to secure UK borders. So is it time to bring in the armed forces to police our borders? And new figures suggest that patients may be priced out of healthcare, as long NHS waiting times are pushing people into paying thousands of pounds for private treatment. Self-funded treatment in the UK increased by 40% during the last 3 months of the year, which experts are claiming that patients are desperate. Now, all that is on the way in the next hour. As ever, you can tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, so let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. So welcome back, Christine. I haven't seen you for a while, although I did see you on Brazier. Traitor. But it's good to see you back.
I did send Neil in my place a couple of times, and I couldn't go.
And he did a great
because of my new knee.
Oh, but how's it faring?
It's doing really well, thank you. Yes.
My mum's going to have one of those soon.
She won't regret it.
Really? Wow.
As long as she's got a good surgeon.
Yeah, exactly. That is the point. That is the point.
But it does take a while, and it's hellish painful. Warn her.
Yeah. Oh well, I'll warn her. She'll be all right. At least she'll be able to move around instead of hobble.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Christine, let's come to you straight away.
Yes.
Then, you've seen the two candidates. Do you think, at the end of the day, the right two ended up in the last?
Absolutely not. I have so lost. I mean, I'm not a Conservative member. I'm not even basically a Conservative, apart from with a small c. I wanted Kemi Badenoch. I thought she would have been brilliant, fresh start, all the clichés. She would have been hell on a stick to Labour. They simply wouldn't have known how to deal with her. Instead of which, we've got now the choices between two of the same, really. But I'm with you. It's got to be Liz Truss. You mentioned who's supporting Rishi. Well, you've only got to look at who's supporting Rishi to realise why you shouldn't be. I mean, the BBC, the Establishment, the Guardian, the Independent, etc., the Blob. And he really would be more of the same. And I do not agree with him that I agree with Liz Truss. We've got to tax cut. I don't agree with Rishi Sunak's.
Well, it's not working, is it?
I mean, he wants to put corporation tax up from, I think, 18 to 25%. That is clear madness. I mean, in Dublin, for example, they put the corporation tax down to 12, and it's becoming a major financial centre. We should make sure that London remains a major financial centre. He's going to kill it off with a massive corp. I mean, the man's insane.
Well, I don't quite know what he's thinking. I mean, maybe he's thinking about the books that he used to do on the pharmacy. This is not a pharmacy, Richie. What do you think, Claire?
Oh, I'm the only one on this panel that has a vote in all of this, by the looks of it.
There you go.
So, yeah, it's really interesting. No, I didn't want these two in the last two. I'll be brutally honest about it. I was a Tom Tugendhat fan right from the start.
No.
Oh,
very nice man, very nice man.
He might be a very nice man,
Next-door neighbour.
and I know he will serve.
Yes,
That's all he kept saying.
Yes. And I agree that Kemi Badenoch looked really, really good, and I think it was maybe just too early for her. But here we are, we have these two candidates. And what's really, really disappointing, and I know that finances and the Treasury stuff is really important, what about the rest of it? I want to know what their policies are for healthcare, what their policies are for education, for immigration. Seen none of it yet.
But aren't they going to carry on with the mandate that they've been voted on? So they've got to carry on with the mandate that they've been elected on. So the things that Boris was doing, they kind of have to go in that direction. They can't, because they're not a complete new government.
They're not
just
a complete
simply
new government.
They're the same government.
But we don't know what their ideas are to make any of this better. So, and this is the real difficulty, because yes, you are elected on a manifesto. However, if things aren't working, they don't have to just stick to it. But I've heard nothing other than them taking lumps out of each other over the economy. But how is that going to make everything else better? What about education? Children's education has suffered so badly, and I've heard absolutely no mention of it coming through either of them. Any of the candidates, in fact, throughout this whole debate. Everybody has fallen into this category of we must talk about tax to look very important. But actually, there are wider issues here, which I really, really want to see discussed.
There are wider issues, but I mean, the bottom line is it's all about the economy, isn't it? And if we don't get the economy right, there is no money to spend on anything else. They're both smaller state Conservatives, aren't they? I mean, what I find so disheartening is the way... I mean, I don't mind that Liz Truss was a Liberal when she went up to university, a Liberal Democrat. So was I. But I changed very, very quickly within about 2 weeks. And she was, when you talk about who's backing Rishi Sunak, Nick Robinson actually said on the Today programme to Liz Truss, it was mind-boggling, but Liz, you went to Greenham Common with your mother. Yes, Nick, I did. I was 7 years old.
Couldn't leave him at home.
Trying to use that against her is just
But
madness.
I think we're going to see a lot of this. We're going to see a lot of dirt being picked up against each candidate. And it's always the way with Conservative leadership events.
But
I know that.
I kind of like
it's
it.
going to be tearing
I kind of
chunks out
like
each other.
them tearing chunks out of each other, because then I want to see them carry on with this, because that's what they did to Boris. They did it to Boris their own. Now they're doing it to each other, and they've completely forgotten about the electorate, of course. I mean, that's what that goes without saying. In actual fact, I think this is what we're seeing here is how disconnected the MPs are with the members.
100%.
Because actually the members said that they would rather have kept Boris in place. That is what they're saying.
Some of them.
And many of them, the majority of them, well, in terms of the majority, and a lot of the big backers also are saying that And if you watched Prime Minister's questions with Boris, and then you have a quick clip of the others in their debates, you can see, frankly, he wipes the floor with all of them. If you are going to replace him, put somebody better in place. But there isn't anyone.
But there's always, and if you go back to the Ian Duncan Smith versus Ken Clarke leadership thing, it was exactly the same. The MPs wanted Kenneth Clarke, and the Tories. The Tory members wanted Ian Duncan Smith, this disconnect. But at the end of the day, the Prime Minister has got, we live in a parliamentary democracy, they've got to command the majority of MPs. And of course, that's where Boris failed, which is why this idea of bringing him back is ludicrous, because he can't command the majority of MPs. But there we are.
Well, I don't know, perhaps they've looked at what they've got and had to rethink. I think a lot of them are getting buyer's remorse, realising that the two that they've got. Look, Liz Truss, I think, to be honest, I think she's the only one really worthy of... I would have chosen her from the start, if I'm honest. Because initially, I thought Nadine Zahawi, but then he did the whole backstabbing thing.
Oh!
And I didn't like the way he sort of came across.
Sounds like a Bond villain.
He came across
What a backstabber.
And then the backstabbing. And then, obviously, Rishi Sunak slithering away like that reminds me of a snake. Because, obviously, he's backstabbed Boris in the most awful of fashion. At least Liz Truss has remained loyal, and I respect loyalty.
Do you know, this business of the sun cream, I mean, handing MPs out with sun cream, branded Rishi sun cream, that is so... It's so pathetic.
It went to the parliamentary press gallery.
It is appalling.
So they're the ones that are going out on the road. Look, all campaigns have their gimmicks.
Yeah,
and
but
actually,
that one was a pre-prepared
so
gimmick.
appalling.
Yeah, of course it was a pre-prepared
But, like, that would have
gimmick.
been prepared months in advance. That's something that takes a while.
If he thinks that's a good idea, God help us.
That wanted to put their name forward will have been planning this for months and months. Please don't assume that this is done in a couple of weeks. But there are always plans afoot.
This is just disgusting.
It's politics.
Whilst we thought that they were getting on with trying to fix the economy, they were sorting out their own egos. It just beggars belief. Well, if you just joined me, welcome on board. I'd love to hear your views. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, after the break, it is time for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should we bring the armed forces in to police our borders? There's been a damning new report which found that the Home Office response to the small boat crisis in the English Channel is, quote, ineffective and inefficient. I could tell you that. The report also suggests some migrants even entered the UK carrying guns and pocket knives, and is also recommending that a new model is desperately needed to secure UK borders. So what do you think? Is it time to bring in the armed forces to police our borders? Send me your thoughts. You can email gbnews@gbnews.uk. Tell me what you think. You can also tweet me at GBNews. I've got a poll up right now asking that question. Should we bring the armed forces in to police our borders? Cast your vote now, but first, let's get an update with the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. We've seen some showers developing this afternoon and even some thunderstorms. That risk continues for the rest of the day, but not everywhere will see wet weather. Some places will stay dry. The far north of Scotland, closest to an area of high pressure, will mostly be fine. Northern Ireland, additionally, and for the far southeast and the far southeast, mostly avoiding the showers, but in between, some wet weather and heavy, slow-moving showers could cause some issues for East Wales, central and southern England during the rest of the day. Some large surface water accumulations on the roads, for example. Showers then drift northeast overnight, continuing to affect central and eastern Scotland for a time. 15 Celsius for Glasgow, 14 for London, so most places mid-teens and a more comfortable night for sleeping, I think, compared with earlier in the week. And in some spots, some sheltered areas, a fresh start with temperatures in the single figures first thing. Now, once any early showers in the east have cleared away, that's where we'll see the brightest skies during the afternoon. For many, the cloud thickens from the west, it turns breezy, and for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of England and Wales, we'll see spells of rain. Low 20s in the north and the west. I think 23 Celsius possible in the southeast with some sunshine. It will feel humid here, and it stays largely dry in East Anglia in the southeast overnight, whilst outbreaks of rain continue elsewhere. And actually, western and central Scotland will see the heaviest of the rain through the night, and with showers on and off elsewhere, it will be fairly unsettled for many. A milder night to come, though, with temperatures staying up into the high teens in a few spots, and then a relatively warm start to Sunday, but a cloudy start for many and a breezy start. Now, in the north and the west, we'll see further outbreaks of rain on and off through the day, even some thunderstorms for western Scotland, but the southeast stays dry and it'll be hot on Sunday with 30 Celsius possible. Monday and Tuesday sees cooler conditions.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GBNews, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christies, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christies, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
So you're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. If you've just joined me, welcome on board. It's coming up to 25 minutes after 4 o'clock. Now, before the break, we were discussing the battle for number 10. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will battle it out to become our Prime Minister in September. Let's have a look at what you've been saying. Dan says, Nana, the records show how woeful Sunak has been as Chancellor. He didn't even see inflation coming, not to mention his betrayal of Boris and a mate of Dominic Cummings. Truss, on the other hand, has embraced Brexit, which shows in her actions. A true Conservative who believes in family and lower taxes. Hear, hear. Stuart says, Liz Truss is a lightweight. It has to be Rishi. Well, could you elaborate? I mean, I love it when people say stuff like that and just say it's a lightweight and there's no more to it. Paul says, Liz Truss is a true convert to leave. I don't listen to anything Rishi says. It's a bit like, somebody who gave up smoking. They're usually the worst, aren't they, in the end? And Jim says, I would rather Boris was our leader. Yeah, me too. We all would. But I think Rishi Sunak will be best. What? That doesn't make any sense, mate. He stabbed him in the back. Right, it is time for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should we bring the armed forces in to police our borders? Now, there's been a damning new report which laid bare the risk to the UK borders. The Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration found that the Home Office response to the small boat crisis is, and I quote this, ineffective and inefficient. It's interesting they do all these reports. I could just tell you that. I could just easily tell you that. In fact, you could probably tell them that. David Neal's report also highlights that more than 200 asylum seekers managed to escape secure taxpayer-funded hotel rooms. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White reports.
For more than 3 years now, the small boats crisis has been growing in intensity. This year already, more than 15,000 people have crossed the Channel and been processed in makeshift reception centres at Dover Harbour. The Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration claims that process has been inefficient and ineffective. David Neal says that for too long the Home Office has continued to treat the problem of small boat crossings as a crisis rather than an ongoing day-to-day issue that should be managed and staffed accordingly. Although he praised the work of individual Border Force officers dealing with at times unmanageable numbers, he was critical of the management of the processing system, which meant that staff dealing with many of those arriving in Dover often failed to record all the necessary details of an individual, such as biometric details like fingerprints and photographs. The Chief Inspector of Borders revealed that 227 asylum seekers had disappeared from secure hotel accommodation in the 4 months to January this year. They haven't been found, and authorities did not have biometric details for many of them. In fact, over one 5-week period, when 57 asylum seekers ran off, Border Force didn't have fingerprints or photographs for 2/3 of them. The Home Office said that since David Neil's inspection, new processing facilities have come on stream, that those arriving in Dover and elsewhere are much more efficiently processed. However, Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said she was sceptical of those Home Office claims, especially as the inspector's report was released on the final day of Parliament, giving MPs no time to question officials on any improvements they claim to have made. Mark White, GB News.
Well, also this morning, revelations that some migrants even entered the UK carrying guns and pocket knives. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should we bring the armed forces in to police our borders? Right, I'm joined now by the former Director General of the UK Border Force, Tony Smith. Tony, firstly, I want to ask you, what do you make of this report?
Well, I think it's key, as you say, Nana, that this was only released today or yesterday. It was actually written and ready for publication in February. So there's quite a lot of things have happened since February and now. And I think that's what the Home Office has been doing, is beefing up some of the arrangements for reception of migrants coming across into Dover, compared with those that David and his team inspected in November, December of last year. But it does raise some very serious questions about our capability to properly receive migrants in these circumstances, in these numbers, in what has become now a perennial problem. And I think the Home Office approach prior to now, and Nana, has been that it's not a perennial problem. Of course, the strategic objective is to stop the boats. And so therefore, why would you invest a huge amount in reception arrangements? But I think they've now realised that actually this is an ongoing problem and they've had to make that investment.
Because one of the things that the report pointed out was that we're treating it like a crisis when it actually isn't a crisis. It's become a regular thing every day. So we need to start looking at it in that way and start managing it. Now, I know you talked about turning back the boats. Is that something that they are, because that was looked at and then Border Force refused to partake in any of it and, you know, it wasn't going to work out. Is that something that they are looking now to pursue?
I think we need to distinguish what we mean by turning back the boats from a returns agreement with France, Nana, because I actually don't think it's feasible with many of these vessels for the Border Force, the Navy or anybody else to physically turn them around in the English Channel without putting significant risk to life. What's needed is an agreement with the French on joint patrols and returns, and that's something I've advocated from day one. We really need to be able, between two civilised countries, both signatories to the 51 Convention on Refugees, friendly allies, to stop human smuggling and work together on this crisis. So this demands a political solution between our politicians and the French politicians, where we really need to come to an agreement, because to me, it's absolutely inhumane that people can be drowning in a channel of 24 miles of channel between two safe countries. There are international agreements that can be put in place, Nana, to fix this, but it requires a political fix. It's not something the Border Force can do on their own.
It's interesting. And I, if I define turning back the boat, what I think people really mean by that is returning people to where they have come from. So that would be, in a way, maybe not turning back the boat, but they board your boat, you carry on back to France. That's, I think, really the idea that people are thinking. Tony, thank you very much. That's Tony Smith, CBE. He's the former Director General for the UK Border Force. Let's look at this practically and the implementation of the possibility of the armed forces taking full control of our borders. They are already in some capacity. Philip Ingram is the former Senior Military Intelligence Officer. Philip, the Navy and the Army What would a sort of an all-hands-on-deck approach look like from a military perspective? I hear that they are involved a little bit, but actually taking over this operation, what would it look like?
Well, the Navy earlier this year had been given overall control for dealing with the small boats crossing the channel. But as previous speaker said, it's very difficult indeed. You have to look at saving lives first and foremost. You can't do anything to endanger people. And that's why we're seeing boats picking up the migrants and actually taking them further across, because it's saving their lives. The military have been involved in this. The border force have got sufficient resources, and the police forces in the areas where the migrants are coming in have got sufficient resources to be able to police it and police the border situations that's there. It's a very small number of beaches that these individuals are landing on. And of course, the military have been providing support under, I think the code name for the operation is Operation Isotrope for some time. And the Army has been helping with using its unmanned surveillance vehicles, the Watchkeeper, and the Navy have been providing patrol boats to beef up the border force patrol boats and to increase their surveillance so that they can identify the small boats that are coming across, look at where they're going to land. You've got lots of time to plan a reception committee. And having looked at the reports on David Neal's report, most of his criticism was about the processing after people came into the UK and were held in the refugee facilities, not the fact that they were coming in.
But then even that part of it, perhaps then we could look at the Army taking over that, because it's not working, is it? I mean, you know, he talked of 57 who ran off, 2/3 of which they had no data on. How is that? Why did they not process them? What's going on?
And again, this is out to contractors, and this is where the contract's wrong. The Army could come in and do it. It's a very expensive way of doing it. The Army is used to processing large numbers of people, and if a surge capacity was needed, I'm sure those plans are in place. It's interesting when you look at the numbers that ran off. These are supposedly individuals who are coming in to seek asylum in this country. They know perfectly well that when they get on shore, if they get processed, a large majority of them will be granted asylum. Those that run off clearly don't want asylum. They have come in for other reasons. And this is why I think the government policy of trying to push people back, the French aren't patrolling the borders in the way that they should do. There should be, I agree with the former head of the border force, that there should be joint patrols in France to try and stop this. But it's serious and organised criminals that are making huge amounts of money, and it's them that are pushing these people forward. And they're pushing them forward, A, because they can get lots of money out of them, or B, that they're sending people in to be exploited either as drug mules or for other human trafficking reasons around the country. And those are a lot of the people that disappear or are disappeared. They're taken away by the organised crime in the UK. And therefore, it's dealing with that. It's taking the incentive away for individuals to go into organised crime and taking the incentive for organised criminals away by arresting them. And there have been a couple of major arrest operations recently.
Yeah, well, we can see what the problem is. There doesn't seem to be much of a solution. Philip, thank you so much. That's Philip Ingram, MBE. He's the former Senior Military Intelligence Officer. Right, if you've just tuned in, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we will continue with our great British debate. And I'm asking, should we take the policing of our borders off the Home Office altogether and give the complete control to the armed forces? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, former Conservative advisor Claire Pissell, and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. Coming up to 35 minutes past 4, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The government says a legal dispute with the European Union will not fix the problems facing the people and businesses of Northern Ireland. It comes after the EU launched fresh legal action against the UK over claims it's failing to comply with the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says the British government has ignored repeated calls to reconsider its position on the trading arrangements. The Port of Dover boss has called a lack of staff at the French border immensely frustrating as travellers face traffic jams of up to 6 hours. As the port declares a critical incident, Doug Bannister says staff are doing all they can to address the issues. Meanwhile, go-slow fuel price protests are causing yet more traffic jams across the UK. Turkey has brokered a deal to resume grain exports through the Black Sea. The agreement was signed this afternoon in Istanbul by Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the United Nations. The war has stalled Kyiv's exports, leaving some 20 million tonnes of grain stuck in silos and causing a global shortage. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says it will enable significant volumes of food to be exported. A former Irish soldier has been sentenced to 15 months in jail for being a member of the so-called Islamic State. Ex-Defence Forces member Lisa Smith was convicted of being part of the terrorist group by Dublin's non-jury Special Criminal Court. The 40-year-old Islam convert was acquitted of a separate charge of financing terror. And an 11-year-old boy has been rescued after drifting more than a mile out to sea on an inflatable dinghy. Footage released by the RNLI shows the moment that volunteers found the boy floating alone in waters off the coast of Kent. His family called the Coast Guard after he was blown out to sea, with the volunteer crew at Dungeness quickly launching a search and rescue. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to Nana Akua in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christies, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
So it's coming up to 40 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now we return to our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, should the armed forces take full control of our borders? Now, there's a damning new report. It laid bare the risk to the UK borders. The Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration found that the Home Office response to the small boat crisis is, and this is a quote here, ineffective and inefficient. Also, this morning revelation, some migrants even entered this country carrying guns and pocket knives. The report is now recommending a new model is desperately required to secure the UK's borders. So for my debate this hour, I'm asking, should the armed forces take full control of them? Well, let's see. Should we give them that? What do you think? Let's have a chat. Joining me today. Oh, well, let's see what you've been saying first. Why not? OK, so let's see. Ian says, no, it is time for the government to do its job. Calling in the army to provide a solution for a civilian problem is a sign of government failure. Darryl says, what could they do? Nothing. The problem is with the political class. Our political leaders need to understand that it's nothing to be ashamed of to control our borders. And Michael says, and what would they do? Shoot the dinghies? The problem is that the dinghies get in the water in the start. As long as the French continue to let this happen, we are in trouble. All right, well, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Right, Claire, starting with you. What do we do about this? Is it the army?
No, it really isn't. And I think Phil Ingram was right. It's the most expensive way of looking at it. And it won't work. I mean, you've got 159,000 full-time serving personnel of the armed forces. We expect them to do a lot. We expect them to help out in emergencies. At least about 6,000 of them are based abroad at any one time. So it's not an effective use of the UK's defences.
Well, what are the rest of them doing? 6,000 of them are abroad.
But they're
What
all
are the others
deployed doing other bits and pieces. I don't profess to know exactly what the armed forces do. The Ministry of Defence, takes their security quite seriously.
But maybe
So
they're
I
doing
should
training, constant training.
They
The actual real thing.
But we
is in front
also
of them.
do bring them in emergency situations. So we did for the vaccine centres. We've done it when firefighters went on strike. Any kind of riots, the police, require the armed forces. So no, I don't think it's.
But we haven't had anything for the. Okay, so we had the fires, yeah. But in between all of that, there's what do they do?
But what do you want to do with them? And I think that's the real question: is what you're expecting the armed forces to do at the border. And I think your viewers are quite right there. What do we expect? They're going to shoot people? No, they're not. They're not going to turn people around, as Tony Smith said quite rightly. It endangers lives. So it's a very, very knee-jerk reaction to say call the armed forces in, and it's also incredibly expensive. And I do know that from experience that when I was at the Home Office, we did have the Navy coming in to patrol parts of the Channel at some point. The bill to the Home Office from the Ministry of Defence was enormous, and quite rightly so. These are very expensive ships, these are very expensive personnel and everything else.
Yeah. I'm going to have to stop you there, Claire. I'm going to have to stop you there because I'm hearing it, but I'm thinking, yes, it's expensive. What compared to $5 million a day that we're paying to house people?
Just to house people.
And also the social impact as well, compared to the lack of infrastructure that we have in this country. I hear the expense, but I listened to all of that, Claire. I did. I didn't interrupt you. I was tempted, but I let you go on a little bit too long, I think, to be honest. But it's too expensive. You're saying it's too expensive, but I think the expense is bigger, and I think we're looking at a funnel of the expense. Oh, this bit's really expensive. Well, once you widen it out and everybody comes here, not only does it encourage others to do it, but then that goes really wide, and suddenly you're looking at how much are we going to pay for all the people that are coming here? The impact of our services, the impact of the housing, the impact to actually storing these people in places where we don't have the space. I mean,
but I'm not
that's the expense.
That it is the result that you... I mean, the problem is so enormous. To look at it only as a thing about small boats is what the Home Office has done. They have looked at small boats and said, this is the problem. No, it isn't.
Well,
actually way wider than that.
Christine.
Well, I mean, the small boats are a very big part of the problem. The other big part of the problem are the blooming French, of course, and they're doing it deliberately. They simply don't care. It's their way of getting back at us for Brexit. They're saying, oh, you have them, you have them. And 88%, I say 88% of the people who come across are men. 75% are between the ages of 18 and 39. And the idea that they are all refugees desperately seeking asylum, understand is why can't we? Of course you can't turn these little boats back. It's amazing. They make it as far as they do. But take them off the little boats, turn them round, take them back to French waters when it's safe, near the coast, whatever the limit is, just send them back to France. We are just a soft touch. It's crazy.
I'm not
and the
buying.
army can help, but we can't hand it over to the army altogether. As you said, it is costing us $5 million a day purely to house these immigrants.
And
$5 million
I'm not
a day.
100% buying the argument, oh, it's so dangerous. Listen, you've come on the boat to a certain distance, right? Nobody wants anyone to die. Let's get that straight.
Just turn them round and back.
If what happens normally, as far as I can see, is that these people then board the boat, which is fine. They board the boat to keep them safe. Instead of turning that boat round back to the UK, keep going straight ahead back to France. I'm sorry, I just don't see it.
Yes,
they keep making out like this is some big deal, and I'm like, listen, when you find these people in the water on the boats, you bring them on board to keep them safe. When they're on board, I don't understand why you can't turn your boat. Instead of turning the boat round, keep it going the way it was. I mean, I must be missing something.
Well, and instead of which, they come here, they fail to photo face them, they fail to take fingerprints, they fail to do all that sort of thing. They give them a mobile phone, they give them goodness knows what else, and they say, welcome to Great Britain. And then within seconds,
They've
goodness
gone.
knows how many of them have
disappeared.
gone. And they all know about a government website which basically was /benefits, /arriving on the beach. They know exactly how to game the system. It's crazy. We're just a soft touch, and we've got to do something about it because of all the knock-on effects you said on housing and schooling and NHS, etc., etc.
And also, then it's the civil unrest as well, because the people around are starting to get really annoyed by this, because we can all see that yes, there will be people who need to seek asylum. Nobody's saying that we don't want to look after people who need help. I will help somebody who needs help, but what we are saying is, I can see when a system is being manipulated and taken advantage of.
If you really wanted asylum, you wouldn't be one of the 98% who threw their documents and their mobile phones into the sea, would you? Apparently, 98% of them arrive with no documentation at all. Now, if you had any, obviously some of them don't have it, but if you'd got it, you would not chuck it into the sea. You would be desperate to hang on to your identity.
But it does also beg the question as to why the Home Office has not sought returns agreements with other EU countries, because it hasn't. And that has been on the cards ever since we left the EU. I'm a big supporter of Brexit, so I'm not blaming this on Brexit. However, I am blaming the Home Office for not getting those returns agreements sorted, because people do pitch up over here. And if you had those agreements in place with all of the other EU countries that they had been through, then you could start the returns process a lot quicker. And at the moment, there are none in place. So why haven't they done that in the last 3.5 years?
Well, one reason may be, I was horrified to read, the new Chief Inspector of Borders, David Neal, he was put in place in March last year. He has still not yet met Priti Patel.
And I think,
what?
I don't like the way they're behaving towards Priti Patel, because I think she's a tough woman. She's got a tough job. And your views, let's welcome our great British voice onto the show. Your opportunity to tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Where should we go? Should we do Cambridge? Cambridge is nice.
Why not?
Should we have a chat with Coral? Coral Fordham. There you are. Coral, what do you think, Coral? I mean, we've got a situation here, haven't we? Really, seriously. I think people are taking the proverbial, in a sense. I appreciate this country should be welcoming, but there's a line and it's beginning to be crossed. What do you think? What do you think is the solution? The armed forces?
I think that they could possibly play a part, but I don't think everything should be handed over to them every time the government can't deal with the situation. My understanding is the French should be dealing with the beaches and not allowing the boats to leave in the first place. So that's the first problem. Why is that still happening if we paid that money? The second thing is, as you say, they are picked up on whatever boats, which obviously costs us money. And why do we bring them to this country illegally, and then the good old taxpayer has to pay out for them, turn the boat around and send them back from whence they came? And as you rightly say, they have no ID, they have no phone, they have nothing. So what are they bringing in? They're bringing guns in now, apparently. So we have criminals amongst us that we're paying for. If they get across, if they avoid the boats, put them in prison. Put them in prison because they are illegal. Lots of them are criminals. If the army want to get involved, why don't we get them to go across and deal with the gangs that are arranging these criminals to come and walk into the soft touch country that sadly we have become? It's down to the government, and it is down to Priti Patel. She may be a tough woman, but she really has got to grab hold of something that us ladies don't have and just go for it. Sort it out.
Well, she's got a civil servant who maybe go up against her, and a border force who are unwilling to help see through some of her policies. So it's not all down to her, sadly. But Coral, I hear your views. I'm sure a lot of them are good people. Most of them probably are, but it's just we need to do something about this. Coral Fordham, lovely to talk to you. She's our great British. The CC, she said that's what she thinks. I mean, look, I agree with her in a sense. Turning back a boat, if it's dangerous and will cause death, I'm not talking about, we don't want people to die. Well, what I'm saying is, if the turn back policy means that you pick people up, put them on your boat and take them back to where they've come from, I can't see what difference that is. All you're doing is not turning the boat round to come to the UK. You're just going back in the same direction you came. I mean, I'm just not seeing why they're saying that's so dangerous. I'm like, Why? It's the same thing.
The other thing which Coral said, which I thought was 100% spot on, is why aren't the French doing more about these gangs? They're operating in their country. They're an illegal operation. Why aren't the French cracking down on them more? My guess is they're doing absolutely nothing. We've paid them millions of pounds to help them, to enable them to crack down, and they seem to be doing nothing.
Because the idea...
They are doing something. Please tell us about it, because so far we're not aware.
Because the idea of turning people back to where they've come from, and not necessarily the boat itself, but getting them on the boat, and then instead of bringing them to the UK, taking them to France, the idea is it's meant to be a deterrent. It's meant to stop people thinking that it's worth doing because they'll end up where they came from in the beginning. That's what it's meant to be. It's not meant to be, oh, we don't want... It's meant to be a deterrent. And I think that would work, but then... You know.
Yeah, no, I do think you're right. And I think the problem is that the criminal gangs aren't being targeted. Now, we've seen a couple of high-profile arrests in the last fortnight or so. But those gangs, you know, they range wider than just France. They are across Europe as a whole.
Probably in this country as well.
And
in this country as well.
This country. But they come, you know, from over in Hungary, Bulgaria, all across that continent. So it needs a much more joined-up approach. It's not just the UK that needs to be doing it. Europe needs to help out here as well, and this is where all of those agreements should be in place.
Do you think we should have a global border force, or like a global border patrol?
I absolutely
which
do.
would be interconnected with all the different countries, and so we can really get a handle on who's going where. And it's because it's the movement of people. I think this is where I think the failure of this whole free movement of people, because it enables this trafficking system to go unchecked, because nobody's checking anything, which is a lovely construct when it comes to trade. But as soon as it comes to movement of people, which everyone was saying this is why people didn't want it, is because you lose people, and that's a problem.
And you do, and I think that is a way forward, and I think that's how we need to be looking.
Well, let's do it. Listen, today I'm asking, should we give full control of our borders to our armed forces? Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts. Stephen says, yes, I think we should task our armed forces to stop all the illegal immigrants entering Britain. This should have been done when the agreement was made to leave the EU. James says, yes, our armed forces should be brought in to control our borders. Clearly, Border Force cannot cope. Terry says the RNLI and UK Border Force, in conjunction with the armed forces, should pick them up in French waters and send them back to France. Right, there's a poll up on Twitter right now asking whether the armed forces should take full control. And currently, 87% of you say yes, 13% of you say no. Well, new figures suggest that some patients may be priced out of the NHS healthcare and waiting time treatment. We'll be finding out. Self-funded treatment in the UK has increased by 40% during the last 3 months of the year, with experts claiming patients are desperate. We'll be back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christies, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good afternoon, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Right, well, there are new figures suggesting long NHS waiting times could be pushing people into paying thousands for private treatment. Now, the figures from the Private Healthcare Information Network, over 250,000 people paid for private healthcare in the last 3 months of the last year, a rise of almost 40%. And to give you an example of the cost, a common operation like a hip or knee replacement, which Christine has just had, she had a knee replacement, which would set you back around about £15,000. Experts claim that the figures show how desperate people have become and could be pricing people out of healthcare. So I'm joined now by former NHS Trust Chairman Roy Lilly. Roy, thank you very much. So I want to start by asking you, what do you make of the numbers of patients that are turning to private healthcare?
I'm not in the least bit surprised. When NHS waiting lists go up, people using the private sector go up. And as NHS waiting times now have gone through the roof, the numbers will follow. And in fact, for private medical insurance, the numbers of people who bought private medical insurance since 2019 in February has doubled. So people are making their own provision.
Do you think that actually that's what needs to be happening ultimately? The people who can pay for it should perhaps consider paying for it, because then it will alleviate a lot of the pressure on the NHS, because actually if there's one thing you should really invest in, it's your own health.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing to say, isn't it? You know, we've got the NHS and it's there for all of us and it's free at the point of use and all the rest of it. But the fact is, I mean, you and I have had these conversations before. It's overwhelmed right now. It's still struggling with COVID. The numbers have gone up by another 17%. They got staff off with COVID. We're in the school holidays now. Because of these ludicrous rules, you have to take your holidays when the schools are on holiday. So nurses and doctors are just like everybody else with kids. Then we've got the capacity problem in the system, the ambulance problem in the system. And social care is pretty much on its knees. They've got 160,000 vacancies. So the hospitals are chock-a-block. So if you're trying to get on with doing what we call elective procedures, that's like the knees and the hips and all the rest of it, you've got to carve out that capacity. Now, the NHS is trying to set up surgical hubs to ring fence what they're doing for things like knees and hips and hospitals. But again, we've got huge problems with staffing. And there's tomorrow, I don't want to break the embargo, but there's a very important report come out from the Health Select Committee that's looking at the NHS numbers, and they are woeful.
Do you think that perhaps then it is that the NHS is trying to do too much? And obviously when it was set up all those years ago, there was no idea that it would end up being such a huge encompassing thing. And it's now time that we rethink the model.
Well, look, I mean, you can have insurance if you want to, or tax. You know, you take your tax out of your right-hand pocket or your insurance out of your left-hand pocket. It's still your trousers. We still have to pay for it. There are two things, really, that have happened. One, the NHS had flatline funding since the world banking crisis. It had 10 years of flatline funding, and that really knackered it. Now we've had COVID, and that's reduced it to its knees. What it needs is a period of leaving it alone politically, some guaranteed reasonable funding, 4% per annum for the next 5 years might do it, and just let them try and get their breath back, because at the moment they're just being hit from all directions.
Well, listen, Roy, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your view. That's Roy Lilly. He's a former NHS Trust Chairman. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. More to come in the next hour. Good afternoon. We are the People's Channel. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It is 5 o'clock, and for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of those big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. Just after 5 o'clock, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The government says a legal dispute with the European Union will not fix the problems facing the people and businesses of Northern Ireland. It comes after the EU launched fresh legal action against the UK over claims it's failing to comply with the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says the British government has ignored repeated calls to reconsider its position on the trading arrangements. MP Andrew Mitchell told GB News he's dismayed by the action.
I do think that the EU have been really quite unhelpful over the issue of Northern Ireland and the protocol, and that the programme that the British government put forward of red and green routes through customs issues was the right approach. And I'm very dismayed indeed that it has now come to a legal case.
The Port of Dover is urging the government to work with French border control to help solve staffing issues. That's as UK travellers face lengthy queues at the start of their summer getaway. The port declared a critical incident earlier with traffic jams of up to 6 hours and holidaymakers being urged to consider staying away. It says it's increased the number of border control booths in Dover by 50%, but delays are causing tourist and freight traffic to be gridlocked. In other travel news, British Airways workers, mostly check-in staff at Heathrow Airport, have voted to call off strike action. Members of Unite and the GMB union had voted for industrial action in a row over pay cuts during the pandemic. However, after extensive negotiations, the company made a new offer, which members have now accepted. Union Unison has announced it will appeal against a new law allowing employers to use agency staff during strikes. The changes mean businesses will soon be able to use agency workers to fill staffing gaps caused by industrial action. It follows government efforts to repeal trade union laws, which previously restricted the action that employers could take. Recent weeks have seen a series of strikes across multiple sectors. The US president's doctor says Joe Biden's COVID symptoms have improved after testing positive yesterday. The White House says he's still experiencing mild symptoms such as tiredness and a dry cough, but his temperature is now normal. The president, who is 79 years old, will continue to work in isolation until he tests negative. Boris Johnson has told Ukraine's president the UK support will not waver, regardless of who becomes the next Prime Minister. It comes as Turkey brokered a deal to resume grain exports through the Black Sea after ports had been blockaded by Russia for months, causing a global shortage. The agreement was signed in Istanbul by Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the United Nations. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says it will enable significant volumes of food to be exported. The two remaining Tory leadership hopefuls are trading words over each other's tax plans. Rishi Sunak is warning against what he calls a huge borrowing spree. That's in response to Liz Truss's plans to cut taxes by at least £30 billion a year. She says her proposals are affordable and the former Chancellor's tax rises will choke off growth. Professor of Economics at Cardiff University, Patrick Minford, who was a former advisor to Margaret Thatcher, told GB News he agrees with Miss Truss.
When the Treasury spent $500 billion on COVID, because obviously it had to, it then turned around and said, but you can't spend any more, in the coming years than that will put up borrowing, because we can't do that sort of thing. And of course, transparently, that is nonsense, having spent $500 billion on COVID.
Health experts are warning that long NHS waiting lists are forcing patients to pay for healthcare out of their own pockets. New figures from a private healthcare network show patients paid for almost 70,000 private treatments themselves between October and December last year. That's up 39% on the previous year. The number of people in England waiting for hospital treatment climbed to a new record high of 6.6 million at the end of May. An 11-year-old boy has been rescued after drifting more than a mile out to sea on an inflatable dinghy. Footage released by the RNLI shows the moment that volunteers found the boy floating alone in waters off the coast of Kent. His family called the Coast Guard after he was blown out to sea, with the volunteer crew at Dungeness quickly launching a search and rescue. Wow, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's coming up to 6 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of those big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. Joining me today is former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and also author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Still to come, each Friday at 5 we'll put the spotlight on a particular guest or subject matter in my feature Friday Focus. And in a few moments I'll be going to be looking at climate change. The record-breaking temperatures this week caused wildfires across Europe. Here in the UK, London Fire Brigade said that Tuesday was its busiest day since World War II, with a major incident declared. Experts are blaming the outbreaks on climate change, a lot of them saying man-made climate change. I will add those words in. But we'll get to the bottom of that and the cause of those wildfires and the truth behind it. Our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can you rely on your police force? Home Office figures show recorded crime in England and Wales is at a 20-year high. The number of offences leading to court action fell to a new low. Also today, the College of Policing has said that the police need to focus on catching criminals rather than monitoring social media debates. I know it's a lot easier and there's evidence, but what do you think? So for our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can we rely on our police force? I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, and your stories of them. I'm sure there's good stories throughout that as well. What is your experience of the police? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. So we start this out on a subject that really, I've been thinking a lot about because there's so many people talking about climate change, blaming it on CO2. And of course, we had those wildfires as well. So we're going to start the hour by looking at the impact and the cause of the wildfires across Europe. Now, the record temperatures this week saw a number of them break out across areas all around the UK and Europe, where the temperatures went 40 degrees and upwards. In fact, a major incident was declared in London. 40 properties were destroyed as temperatures soared, with one fire devastating the village of Wennington. That is a whole village. I mean, now if you listen to mainstream media, you'd be forgiven for having climate change hysteria.
In central London, some still braved an open-top bus tour.
Yeah, real concerns. Got my trusty thermometer here. 32 degrees it's telling me at the moment. This is just summer. We should get out and enjoy it. This is not...
Oh, that was my favourite bit. They cut it off. This is not just summer. Right, let's start by speaking to Bob Ward, Policy Director at the Grantham Research Institute of Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics. He joins me down the line. All right, so I've got a question for you then, Bob. I just want to know, in your view, the climate change thing. I mean, what is the reason for climate change? What do you think they are?
Hi, Nana. Thanks for having me on the show. So I think most of us can now see that the climate is changing around us. People who are, particularly gardeners and farmers, can see that there's been these changes, and there are events like we saw earlier this week with the heat wave and reaching record temperatures that are really an indication of the impacts that climate change are having on us. So the question then is, what explains it? Well, scientists have been looking at trying to find out what the explanation is for a long time, and they've reached a consensus around the rise in greenhouse gas concentrations, particularly carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is unequivocal and is being measured. And we know that rise in carbon dioxide is the result of primarily of burning of fossil fuels, particularly since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, I should say that having worked out what the cause is, it doesn't require you to do any particular policy. And I think people get concerned about the policies and think, oh, well, maybe we should dispute the findings of the science. And I don't think we need to do that. We should focus on an adult discussion about what we should do about this.
Okay, so look, you said about CO2 and the climate change and all this thing, but okay, I've got a couple of questions for you. Okay, so the medieval warm period and the Roman warm period had nothing to do with the changes in CO2. Is that true or false? Because these are some things that people say.
So they were changes that were quite widespread regionally. They weren't global changes, and they were just due to fluctuations in our climate, which we've seen since the end of the Ice Age about 12,000 years ago. But our climate's been relatively stable in that time, and we're now reaching even small changes in our climate, we've seen the global temperature increase by 1.1 Celsius degree since the late 19th century.
But so true or false then? The medieval warm period and Roman warm period had nothing to do with changes in CO2. Is that true or false?
That's true, that it wasn't due to primarily due to carbon dioxide.
Okay, so basically there's a period there that had nothing to do with CO2. Okay, so true or false this one then? CO2 levels were much higher when the world was also in a major ice age.
No, that's not true. We see throughout geological history, and I'm a geologist by training, that usually you have high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere during high periods of temperature. But I should make clear that it is not carbon dioxide that has always been responsible for increases in heat. We have seen periods where the change in the Earth's orbit and fluctuations in the Earth's orbit have led to warming on Earth. So we can measure that, and that's not the reason why the Earth has been warming over the last century.
So basically then, basically the Ice Age and the fact that CO2 levels were higher was not the reason for climate change at that time. You're saying that it was the axis of the Earth, but yet CO2 levels were higher. Because that's what I'm saying. I'm saying there was a major ice age.
They weren't higher. Carbon dioxide levels now, are higher than they've been on Earth for about 3 million years. So all the way through the Ice Age, they were higher than they were during the last Ice Age. And that's what's really worrying. You know, modern humans only evolved about 250,000 years ago. So we now have levels of carbon dioxide that we have no experience of as a species. And 3 million years ago, our best estimate was that temperature was about 2.5 to 4 degrees higher than today. And at that stage, the polar ice caps were much smaller and global sea level was 5 to 25 meters higher than today.
Okay, well, what about this one then? Okay, so what about this then? True or false then? Sea levels were 120 meters lower 12,000 years ago, and that was nothing to do with CO2.
That's right, because what happened was you locked up all the water in the ice caps. But let me emphasize that just because the changes in the orbit of the Earth have driven past temperature changes, that doesn't mean it is the only thing. And we can measure the Earth's orbit and its relative to the sun very, very accurately, and that cannot be the explanation for the warming we've seen in the last century. It absolutely isn't that.
All right, and what about this one then? True or false? Humans generate 3.5% of CO2 and the rest is actually natural. True or false?
Well, humans have been driving the increase we've seen. There was already carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and indeed we've known for a long time that the carbon dioxide and water vapor in the atmosphere is actually the only reason that the Earth's surface isn't minus 18 degrees. So we've known for a long time that carbon dioxide and water vapor in the atmosphere is what keeps the Earth warm. But we have definitely increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by about 50% since the late 19th century, and it's undoubtedly down to fossil fuels.
But if we
can measure the kind of carbon that's in the atmosphere, and it's from fossil fuels.
But if we only generate 3.5% of CO2 and the rest of it is natural, then surely the CO2 is not the reason for the climate changing, because it's such a small proportion. The remainder is generated naturally. So this planet, 96.5% of it generates its own CO2 with or without us.
Well, we've increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by about 50%. Before that, it was stable for a long period. And
but 50%...
stable carbon dioxide levels and then stable climate.
But 50% of 3.5, what's that, 1.75, if my maths serves me correctly, which would mean it would be about 5 point something, which is still tiny. So I'm saying that if we generate such a small proportion of CO2 and the rest of it is natural, what makes you think that the reason why the planet is warming up is the CO2 increase, which is tiny in comparison to what is naturally occurring in any case?
Right, but remember that the natural level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that we had before we started burning fossil fuels was helping to keep the temperature of the Earth 32 degrees warmer than it otherwise would be. Remember, I said that without carbon dioxide and water vapor in the atmosphere, the temperature of the Earth would be about minus 18 degrees, when actually before industrialization, the average temperature was plus 14 degrees. Now, by adding 50% more carbon dioxide in the last 100 years, the average temperature has gone up by over a degree. That doesn't sound much, but let me just tell you that the difference between the average temperature today on Earth and the average temperature in the last ice age is only 5 degrees. So very small changes in the global average temperature have a massive impact on the global climate.
Okay, but we need to keep it in proportion, because if we're only producing, say, 95%, you know, the Earth is doing its 95%, giving off a lot of that itself, then I'm not sure how much impact we have if we just, you know, all go electric. Okay, I've just got...
We're responsible for 100% of the increase in carbon dioxide.
Yes, I understand that. 100%. If we're in, yes, but 100% even of 3.5 is only 7. So that still leaves 93%, which is natural. So I'm saying that we're such a, even though in our minds, that is, we've doubled it. We have been on Earth for a long time, but I'm still saying that the vast majority of CO2 appears to be caused naturally, of which we don't really have any power to control.
Yeah, but it's like having a full bathtub. And if the bathtub is full and just stays full, you have no problem. You turn the tap on, and even a small amount, it causes it to overflow. So small increase, what might seem like a small increase, is having a big impact on our climate.
I don't know how.
About that,
yeah, but it might have done that. But we don't know that it wouldn't have done it anyway. Okay, finally, there is true or false then? True or false? There is no evidence of a causal link between CO2 and temperature. It's all models and assumptions.
No, that's completely wrong. So we've known for a long time. Well, look, John Tyndall did experiments in the 1859 in which he tried to work out what it was in the atmosphere that keeps the Earth warm. And he tested in the laboratory and showed that carbon dioxide tends to trap infrared heat and doesn't allow it to escape from the Earth. So what happens is the sun's energy comes in mostly as ultraviolet radiation. It's absorbed by the Earth, and then a lot of the energy then escapes as infrared. But the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere traps that heat. And if you increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you trap more of the heat. And that is what's causing the warming of the Earth at the moment.
Well, I think it's fascinating to hear, and it's good to have your side of it, Bob. So you're ultimately saying that CO2, there is a causal link between CO2 and temperature, and it's not just models and assumptions. That's what your main thing is.
That's true. It's been shown in a laboratory more than 150 years ago. So it's old science, and one that's kind of can be demonstrated by most people who go into a school laboratory at the moment. You could do the experiment for yourself.
Okay, so so it's interesting stuff, right? So basically, in your view, the rise in CO2 is caused by humans, and that tiny, 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 tiny rise is the reason why our temperatures are rising and why we are experiencing things like wildfires, etc. Just yes or
that's
no?
Right. That's right. And we've looked for other potential causes, but as I said, there isn't any. You know, the Earth's orbit is not changing. The sun's energy is not changing. Nothing explains this rise in temperature other than the carbon dioxide that we know is keeping the Earth warm anyway. So it's the only logical explanation for what we're seeing.
Okay, well, listen, Bob, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me. That's Bob Ward.
Talk to you, Nana. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your view, Bob Ward, Policy Director at the Grantham Research. We'll have another round of that. Right, I'm also joined in the studio by Brian Catt. He's a physicist and engineer. Brian, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on there. Now, basically, I asked a series of questions because I wanted to know, true or false, whether a lot of the claims that we're hearing with regard to climate change and CO2 are actual real things. Now, what I've heard is that actually, from Bob, is that CO2 is the reason why the climate is changing, and it is the reason why we are experiencing this sort of weather. In your view, is that correct?
No.
Why?
Well, simply because there's There's no actual evidence that CO2 causes the problem. That is the presumption that's fed into a model. But the actual change we observe in nature is very much the same now in terms of the way it changes as it has been in the past, the last 10,000 years of records.
Well, so I asked him a series of 5 questions, true or false. I'm going to ask you the same ones, because it's important to get the same questions. So the first question, the medieval warm period and Roman warm period had nothing to do with changes of CO2, true or false?
Nothing to do. Correct, true.
Yeah. Well, I think he answered true to that one as well. Yeah. He answered, so he said that was true. Then I asked him, CO2 levels were much higher when the world was also in a major ice age, and he said that was false.
That is false.
That is false. So, talk to me about CO2 levels then.
Well, probably the most interesting thing, I can't really use this here. I bought some presents for you.
Oh, you know, they'll be reflective.
They'll be reflected, yes. But you probably can't see. Yes, you can.
It's a little squiggly lines.
This is the ice age. This is the interglacial. It's the warm period we're currently in, part of the ice age. And you can see there it's going down. That's the cool bit we're now in.
So are you saying
it's going up and down 2 degrees every 1,000 years?
Cyclical. It's cyclical.
It's very cyclical. Yes.
Okay. Now, another true or false? Sea levels were 120 metres lower 12,000 years ago, and that was nothing to do with CO2.
Wasn't 12,000 years ago. It was 17,000 years ago,
yeah.
And it had nothing to do with CO2. You should also note that when it was warmer during this interglacial, 2 degrees warmer than now, CO2 levels were a third less than they currently are.
Yeah.
So it's a negative correlation, not a positive
So
one.
he had the same answer as you there as well. And so I'm interested to see whether how you come to different conclusions. Now, the fourth thing I asked him, true or false, humans generate 3.5% of CO2 and the rest is natural.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more. The whole point is it's a tiny amount.
Yeah.
Because 98% of all the CO2 in the world is in the oceans. And that has to stay in equilibrium with the atmosphere. There's a thing in physics called Henry's law, which says there's an equilibrium at any particular temperature. So as the oceans warm up, you expect more CO2 to enter the atmosphere.
And finally, the last thing I asked him, there is no evidence of a causal link between CO2 and temperature. It's all models and assumptions. He said that was false.
That's correct.
So it's true. You think that's true?
I think that's correct.
So
it's an attribution that they make. They make that assumption when they program the model. And you can't say it's not true because there's a whole argument about how sensitive you should make it. And they argue it. And the sensitivity they've used, let me see, I'm trying to see it the right way around from the camera. The sensitivity that they've been using has had to come down and down because the models are terminally wrong. They keep being wrong. And the reason they're wrong is because it's not science that they use. It's a mathematical model. It's a bit like Ferguson and his
It's a bit like the COVID models. Yeah, we know that. Yeah.
And in fact, the error, interestingly, the error is one Ferguson, I call it, which is 250%. That's what they overpredict by.
So, because we're running out of time, and I'm so sorry we couldn't have got you on earlier because I'd have loved to have you head to head.
Come again.
We will definitely. I'm going to get you both. Bit clean. What's wrong with you? I'll get you both here, and because I'd like to get you both discussing this one, because I'd like to hear it from both of you. So, in your view, then, this whole obsession with CO2, is this the right track, in your view, in any sense, to try and sort of...
Well, no, because what we need to do for our electricity infrastructure, our heating infrastructure, gas infrastructure, the energy infrastructure that drives our economy is not make it more expensive and more difficult to get, it's to make it more plentiful and cheaper. And the measures that are taken, because CO2, every time, are wholly wrong. If you want the best solutions from an engineering point of view and a physics point of view to the claims, problems of exhaustion of fossil fuels, etc., you wouldn't do anything the government is doing.
And is climate change man-made in your view, then? The way we're moving now is the reason?
Well, there may be some small perturbation due to what humans do to the global climate system, but it's not properly considered in the models. And what they don't consider in the models is what the natural feedback is. The thing that keeps us stable in space. I got that. That's a world, but it's not inflated. But the oceans keep the climate stable. If the sea gets hotter, it's not inflated. I'm sorry. If the seas get hotter, which is most of the planet, they evaporate. They form. That takes the heat up to the troposphere, where it was radiated to space, and the clouds that are then formed as the water vapour condenses reflect the sun. It's a natural control system. It's kept us stable for 500 million years.
So what makes us think we can do anything about that?
We can't.
Exactly.
Don't mess with it.
That's what I think. That's what I think, Brian. Listen, it's so good to talk to you. I'll have you both on and you can scrap it out. Unfortunately, although I couldn't get his cab here on time. Really good to talk to you.
It's great to get here. It's always a pleasure to be back with the media in an adrenaline-filled adventure.
Thank you very much. That's Brian the Cat. He's a physicist and an engineer. Well, there you go. That's climate change all summed up for you. So there are two sides to every single coin. Coming up, it's the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, can you rely on your police force? Police forces in England and Wales have recorded the highest number of crimes in 20 years, but that's as charge rates hit the record low. I want to hear your thoughts, your experience of the police. We'll be back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christies, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
28 minutes after 5 o'clock if you've just joined me. Where have you been? I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. Christine Hamilton just yawned.
No, I don't.
And that was actually quite loud. I didn't know whether you heard it or not, but I'm joined now by...
I said I'm going to. I don't think I did.
Christine Hamilton and Claire Pearsall. They're my panellists this afternoon. Right, well, we're live here on TV, online and on digital radio. It is time for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, can you rely on your police force? Record crime in England and Wales has hit a 20-year high, but the number of offences leading to court action fell to a new low of just over 5%. Now, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, said hundreds of thousands more criminals are getting away with appalling crimes and more victims have been let down under the Conservatives. So for our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can you rely on your police force? I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this. Also, how the police have helped you, because it's not all a bad show. But let's speak to David Hines. He's the founder and spokesperson of the National Victims Association. And now, David, it's good to talk to you. When I hear about crimes, I often feel there is too much emphasis on the perpetrator. I get very annoyed about it. But tell me what your experience with the police has been like.
Good afternoon, Nana. I've had various experiences with the police. The first one was a bad one, which a police officer lied to me many years ago, assaulted me, and to his despair, I became a magistrate a year later. And when I was sitting in court, he came into the witness box. He couldn't believe that I was a magistrate. However, following on from that, I had great faith in the police and still do to a certain degree today. Then in 1992, unfortunately, my daughter was murdered. The police were fantastic in the respect that I was in Turkey when it happened. and they flew me back into Newcastle Airport on the Monday. She died on the Sunday, which was just gone 30 years ago this year. They couldn't have been any more helpful in the 13 months it took to come to trial in 1993. So I've had experience in the courts. I've had experience I took a 5-year career break and I founded the National Victims Association. But I have to say that I believe that at the moment the public are a bit despairing with the police, and I'm not putting it down to them to blame entirely. For example, my car was broken into where I live just 2 weeks ago, and we didn't even get a police officer. Everything's done virtually. It's just, can you send this photograph in? Can you send that video in? And I was a bit disgusted the way I'd been treated. However, taking a step back, I run conferences for homicide victims for 21 years, respite weekends, and it was the government actually let us down with funding and finance. I took part in the 3 years Home Office Victims Advisory Panel. I worked with the Diverse Victims Commissioner. The report was given to the government, and everything that was done with a victim's perspective was just thrown out the window. I can't agree with Yvette Cooper, by the way, that's a Conservative government, because I've had every politician going for the last 30 years, and it doesn't matter what I say or what the victims say, it never changes. It never changes at all.
So do you think, with your experience, I'm so sorry to hear about your daughter, that's horrendous. I mean, you know, I don't know that's every parent's worst nightmare, and I don't know how you go about your life after something like that. But how do you feel about the police? Yeah, it must have been very hard for you. And do you feel that people can rely on them now? I mean, you've seen that the charge rate has dropped. It was 6% last year, I think, or the last time we did the figures. Now we're doing it again. It's just gone up a little. It's gone down a bit, another sort of 0.5%. It's just over 5%.
A lot of people on GBNews on the site have asked me to mention lots of things, but I don't have the time to do it, to be honest. So I don't have faith in some of the incidents I've seen with the police regarding political things in London and the statues and the warp nonsense that we get. But I do have a lot of faith in the police generally. I can rely on the police force. I have to rely on the police force. What alternative is it? They do a good job. Maybe they're under-resourced. I don't know. I'd like to think they could do a better job. But I still think that they could have, for example, certain forces that we at the National Victims Association work with, we wanted to do training programs with them. But no, the funding wasn't there. There's always funding for criminals, of course. There's an abundance of money about for them. Always is. But the poor victim doesn't get seen to. Now, the police could have taken us up on it. They said they didn't have the budgets, but they'll find money for something else. They'll find money for policing and that and the other. But they should have taken the advice of, when it comes to homicide, of listening to the National Victims Association and listening to a company called Victim Care, which I'm now a director of. That was set up in 2006 by myself, and Harriet Harman was the one who suggested that we did it. However, there's still no funding around, and the victim would like an opportunity to work with the police forces to make things better for victims. But the general public, getting back to your question, Nana, do they have faith in them? I'm looking at my wife now. I don't know if she has or hasn't, but she was more concerned that the police never turned up on a minor incident. But, you know, breaking into a car is just materialistic. Losing a life is totally different. So I've seen all extremes. And with sitting on the bench, I've seen some of the sentences are ridiculous. Letting prisoners out is ridiculous. And I don't know.
It's you know, David, it's so really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, and thank you so much.
I do have lots of other things, Nana. At another time, I can elaborate on lots of other things. But I know you only wanted to talk about the police today. And if they had the resources, and by the way, some of my family are retired police officers. My nephew and his wife, and my brother was a prison officer who's deceased now. We've all had a connection with the forces. And I'd just like to think, and hopefully, that they get the funding that they need to give the public a better service.
Yeah, here, David, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's David Hines. He's the founder and
thank you.
spokesperson of the National Victims Association. He's also a Geordie like me. Well, yeah. Right, if you just joined me, welcome. I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, we'll continue our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, can you rely on your police force? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, former Conservative advisor Claire Pissell and author Christine Hamilton. And of course, former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley will join me. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. 5:35, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. We start with some breaking news just in. The RMT has announced a strike by more than 40,000 workers at Network Rail, and 14 train companies will go ahead next Wednesday after there's been no breakthrough in talks. We'll bring you more on that story as we get it. In other news, the government says a legal dispute with the European Union will not fix the problems facing the people and businesses of Northern Ireland. It comes after the EU launched fresh legal action against the UK over claims it's failing to comply with the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says the government has ignored repeated calls to reconsider its position on the trading arrangements. The Transport Secretary says he's working closely with France's Transport Minister to address issues which are causing 6-hour tailbacks at the port of Dover. It's after Dover officials declared a critical incident and urged the government to work with French border control to help solve staffing issues there. Grant Shapps says he welcomes efforts to minimise further disruption so people can get away quickly. Turkey has brokered a deal to resume grain exports from Ukraine through the Black Sea. It follows a blockade of several months by Russia, which caused a global shortage. The agreement was signed in Istanbul by Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the United Nations. And an 11-year-old boy has been rescued after drifting more than a mile out to sea on an inflatable dinghy. Footage released by the RNLI shows the moment that volunteers found him floating alone in waters off the coast of Kent. His family called the Coast Guard after he was blown out to sea, with the volunteer crew at Dungeness quickly launching a search and rescue operation. We're on TV, we're online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back to Nana Akua in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Let's give you a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy $1.200 US dollars and 1.174 euros. The price of gold currently standing at £1,441 and 95 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christies, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live. And also don't forget, you can download our GB News app where you can catch up with all the shows that we have here on the channel. I'm Nana Akua, and we return to our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, can you rely on your police force? Now, crime is on the rise, and charge rates have actually hit a new low. Now, a total of 6.3 million crimes were recorded in the year to March 2022. Knife crime, theft, domestic abuse, they've all gone up, but the conviction rate is less than 6%. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, can you rely on your police force? I'm also joined now by former Met Detective Peter Blexley. Peter, thank you for joining me. What do you think? In answer to the question, do you think people can rely on the police force at the moment?
There are many talented, dedicated, brilliant police officers that we're very fortunate to have, but we cannot escape the fact that British policing, in many, many regards, is in absolute crisis. We've got half a dozen police forces in special measures, including the Met and Greater Manchester. So these are essentially police forces that are failing in many, many regards. And can we rely on them? We need to think that we can, because when we pick up that phone and dial 999 in our moment of crisis, we want to be able to rely on them. But sadly, we are being failed in so many ways.
Why do you think this is the case? Because, I mean, earlier I was speaking to a gentleman who's, he lost his daughter. She was murdered, actually. And David basically said that, the police were brilliant, but the emphasis seemed to be on the actual perpetrators of the crimes rather than the victims. What do you think is going wrong with the police force? Is it the numbers? Is it the lack of investment? What is it?
I watched your interview with David with great interest, and he was a man of commendable strength and purpose. And what he said about when his daughter was tragically murdered all those years ago was that the police were very good. Actually, they still are when it comes to dealing with the big stuff. They have expertise and experience that enables them, generally speaking, with major inquiries, to carry those out very, very well. But in recent decades, policing per se, the policing that you and I and your viewers and listeners might encounter on a day-to-day basis, the front line, in many regards, it's lost its way, not because of the officers on the front line, but because of those who preside over them, the senior officers that create the policies, that tell them what the priorities are, that apply the pressure to them, because they have believed that policing should be everything to everyone. And of course, that is nonsense. What do we want from our police? We want our streets to be kept safe, please, and we want bad people locked up. And I know that sounds simplistic, but much of policing at a basic level is quite simple. Yes, there are complexities, but if you apply those principles in their very basic form, there you have policing. And that's what the public want. And in many regards, sadly, they are not getting.
And finally, a lot of people say it's because we've shut down police stations, there's not investment and this and that. But do you think that's really it? I mean, for me, it's a bit like the NHS. You can keep chucking money at it, but if you don't put it in the right place or harness it properly, then you'll still get the same result. Just very briefly, is your view that bigger investment would actually be a great thing, or is it more the actual structures and the way it's organised?
Yeah, the decade of austerity affected policing catastrophically when they lost so many tens of thousands of police officers and back staff. Losing police stations, 600 of them, yes, you lose your connection with the communities. Destroying neighbourhood policing in many regards, that was catastrophic, and we need to reinvent that as a matter of urgency. Connect with the public, give them a service, earn their trust, do the basics.
Peter Blexley, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your view. Lovely to speak to you. Thank you. Right, let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Leyland says the police are a joke nowadays. There's little or no respect for them. They are political, taking the knee, dressing up in rainbow bubble bees, painting their cars with rainbows. Yeah, I hear you. Jackie says, I think the police are not supported. There is too much red tape and we then beat them up. John says it is not the police force who is at fault here. The police are impartial evidence gatherers. It's the Criminal Prosecution Service that choose not to bring those cases to court. Yeah, there is a bit of an interesting one with that, the relationship between the CPS and the police. Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined now by Claire Pearsall and also Christine Hamilton. Christine, coming to you first with regard to the police. Can we rely on them these days?
Well, I think the last guest put his finger on it when he pointed out that 6 of our main police forces are in special measures. Now, that is an unbelievable statistic. That it's mind-boggling, frankly, including the Met Police. What happened when Cressida Dick was found wanting? Was she got rid of? No, she was reappointed, and she has gone now.
Disaster, wasn't she?
Sorry?
She was a disaster.
She was an absolute disaster.
It just ticked a few boxes, isn't it? It was sort of like a box-ticking exercise.
They couldn't get rid of her because she was a woman, basically, and that they kept her. I think, and your last, the viewer whose views went up, they're too busy, exactly, painting their cars, wokery, joining in gay marches and goodness knows what.
Policing Texas or policing...
The biggest deterrent to anybody from committing any sort of crime is what? It is fear of getting caught. Now, as you go into one of our major supermarkets, as you go in, you are met with a cheery policeman, and he's got his arms folding and his eyes are right at yours.
Is that a cardboard cutout?
It's a cardboard cutout.
Not the real one, is it?
Not a real one.
Can't afford that.
Cardboard cutout. It doesn't say anything, but as you go in, there is the policeman, and the unwritten message is, we're watching you. And it's very powerful. So it's the visual sight of the police on the...
Can it run?
Can it run better than I do? But you get the point. You get the point. It's very effective.
It's as useful as a Dalek, basically.
No, it has a powerful effect.
But I do think that's right. Actually, visibility in policing is really important. A lot of my residents, I live in a low-crime area. I'm really lucky, but we do have some antisocial behaviour. And everybody says, well, where are the police? We want to see them out and about patrolling. And I think that in itself is a deterrent. Police officers walking around, knowing who people are, knowing where the troublemakers are. And I know that sounds a bit sort of 1970s, but it works.
50s almost.
Well, 50s, but people feel safer if they see the police. Are the criminals going to be less likely? Maybe. I think,
well, they are.
Your last
I
guest
think they
was
would
right.
be.
The respect level for the police has gone right down. So maybe we need to do a little bit of advice on parenting as well.
Yes, parenting. But the other problem is that there is such an enormous the whole criminal justice system is shaking to its core. And there is such an enormous backlog, and people wait months, years and years before they come to trial. And this recent strike by barristers who are basically dependent on legal aid, which is pitifully low. I mean, some junior barristers are just earning laughable amounts of money.
Well, when I came out of when I did my first job, I remember KISS 100, I think I was on £7,000 a year. I thought that was a lot. Well, it was better than, actually, I think I got more for my student loan, but I mean,
My first job, I was on £800 a year.
Wow.
That was a very long time ago.
What about you, Claire, your first job, how much were you on?
10,500.
Oh, 500, you got a bit more. Well, let's find out what you guys think with regard to the police, because this show is nothing to do without you, and nothing without you and your views. It's not nothing to do with you. Sorry. It's a Freudian slip there. Right, Great British Voice, where should we go? Let's see, Kidderminster. I quite fancy having another chat with John. I spoke to him last week. Wonder if he's changed his position. John, good to see you, my friend. John, the police. What do you think? I mean, do you trust them? Are they there for you? Do you rely on them? John, are you frozen in animation?
I trust them and I rely on them because I have no choice. And I think that, like any sector of the British population, there will be one or two bad eggs in there. There are bound to be people who don't really trust us the way we should trust them, really. There are going to be bad eggs, aren't there? However, I think there's an uphill struggle. If you go next along the line, once the police have found somebody who's guilty and the courts have found him so, we lock them up in the prison system, the criminal justice system, which is absolutely broken and it needs looking at. And if we didn't have so many people reoffending and not so many people coming out of prison and simply doing the circuit and going back in again, the police would have less work to do and they would be more available to us. But to get the government to spend money on reducing reoffending is, well, it's getting blood out of a stone. So to answer your question, Nana, yes, I do. I trust the police and I rely on them when I need to. But I think it's a much deeper problem than just the police. I think all of it. I agree. The two previous people you had speaking on the show, I agree with them absolutely. And they should know because they're in it day after day. I visit prisons on a regular basis and see that end of it. But, yeah, to answer your question, yes, I do.
Thank you, John. Lovely to hear that. I'm glad that people still have confidence in the police. John Reid, he's our Great British Voice. Right, let's come back to my panel. Christine Hamilton and also Claire Pearsall. Yes, so John in Kidderminster does actually think that he could rely on the police. I'd be very sceptical if I was calling them something slightly minor.
It wasn't your question, do you trust them? And he said yes.
He said he trusts
Trusting them is one thing.
he said
trust the police.
No, but he said he sees
whether you can rely on them.
No, he said he relies on them because he has to rely on them.
Oh, he did say rely on them, did
But
he?
and I do also think it depends on where you live.
Of course it does.
I live in a rural area with low crime, so I don't have to call on them. I'm very lucky. I don't have to call on them very often. But there are people in inner cities who really need that assistance, and that's where it's failing. So it doesn't seem to be fair, sort of levelled out across the country. So I think that's a real problem, and we need to look at that. And you must see that. You also live in a
absolutely. We live in a rural area, and there is very little crime if you live in the middle of London. I mean, one of the most alarming things is the increase in knife crime amongst youngsters. I mean, it's appalling. Sadiq Khan, of course, is in control of London.
Well, less said about him, the better. I mean, what has he done? I don't know what he does. What does he do apart from go around with his cavalcade and just start lecturing about other things that he shouldn't be talking about, like decriminalising cannabis and things like that? It's sort of...
Needs to be concentrating on the serious crime that's going on in the heart of our city. It is ridiculous that he's not paying attention to that. Things like that need to be funded more.
Well, I quite like the idea as well, bringing back simple things like actual neighbourhood policing, which I think would have such a great impact. I don't get it. It's probably the easiest thing to do. But today I've been asking you whether you can rely on your police force. Let's see what you've been saying. Sean says, I respect and trust our British police. They are tragically understaffed and underfunded. They are part of our national security and are invaluable. I would agree with her. I think they are invaluable. I'm very disappointed at the lack of investment and also the closing of the police stations, which I think was madness. Marianne says a lot of their time is taken up with issues relating to mental health. They do the job of social workers, which takes them away from real criminal activity. Policing needs a root and branch review. Yes, they do lots of these reviews, though, sadly, and that's probably all that will happen. Well, let's move on to our quickfire debates this afternoon. The Port of Dover was declared a critical incident due to 6-hour queues leading to the ferry terminal. National Highways said that the weekend was expected to be one of the busiest periods of the year for holidaymakers. Now, the port has accused the French authorities of ruining the summer getaway for thousands of families. The UK government has been working closely with the French authorities to ease disruption and provide on-the-ground support. So, what do you think? You've seen the queues. I mean, if you're listening on radio, there's a long queues leading all the way to the port. Ridiculously long.
Claire knows much more about this than I do because she lives fairly close to Dover, but as I understand it, it's the French authorities are being particularly slow on sort of things like passport control. Whether that's deliberate or not, one wouldn't like to say.
Yeah, they haven't staffed the amount of booths needed. So the Port of Dover, I think there were 12 desks open for them and they only sent about 5 or 6 people over.
So the French have to send them over?
They do, yeah. It's their border and our border. The English one is over in Calais. They're juxtaposed borders.
That's just so sneaky.
It is sneaky, but I have seen the queue of lorries coming up the M20.
That's bad. Look, we should be able to do something about that. Surely we can't.
I absolutely bet that's deliberate. I'm afraid. I simply don't trust them.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Not all the French.
They can do.
Not all the
sugar
French.
Us up, they will.
Well, look, maybe, but not all the French. I mean, some French people are really.
Well, not all the French. Of course not.
Well, you said you don't trust the trust, not touch. Another one of those.
By that, I mean the French, the powerful
the border
French.
force.
Yes.
I get it.
Yes, the Macron, basically.
Macron. Well, listen, up next, Jubes and Co with Michelle Dewberry, who's here in the studio. Michelle, I'm sure you've got some exciting stuff for us. What have you got coming up?
Yes, hello, Nana. Happy Friday to you. We're going to do things a little bit different on Jubes and Co today. In fact, every Friday for the next 6 weeks, what we're going to do is instead of getting into a variety of issues, we're going to pick one, something that I know that viewers are very passionate about, and we're going to get into it properly. Tonight, we're going to start with immigration. I know that this is a hot topic for many people watching. We're going to look at what is the UK's immigration policy, what are the problems with it, what should the policy be, and how do we deal with the situation occurring in the Channel? So there'll be a lot of robust debate, to put it mildly, lots of different opinions. And crucially, though, Nana, we want to try and come up with some solutions. So if Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are watching, they can make notes, get some good ideas and claim them as their own.
Well, listen, Michelle, it sounds very exciting. I'm sure the viewers will look forward to that. That is on the way with Jubes and Co. Now, earlier today, I had a poll up on Twitter asking you whether the armed forces should take full control of our borders. Turns out 85% of you say yes, and just 15% of you say no. Well, It's obviously, yes, I agree, they should do, but obviously it's a complicated equation, but I'm sure they can work it out. Well, I'm going to say a big thank you to my panel, the fabulous Claire Pearce, or Claire. Thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to see you. And the lovely Christine Hamilton. Thank you so much, Christine.
You're fabulous. I'm lovely.
There you go.
You're both, Nana.
Oh, well, there you go. And the fabulous and lovely myself. Listen, no, a big thank you to you at home for your company as ever. I'll see you tomorrow again at 4 o'clock to discuss the top stories with me. Joining me, Father Calvin Robinson, and also columnist and broadcaster Lizzie Cundy. Don't forget you can catch up with us on the GB News app. I'll leave you with the weather. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. We've seen some showers developing this afternoon and even some thunderstorms. That risk continues for the rest of the day, but not everywhere will see wet weather. Some places will stay dry. The far north of Scotland, closest to an area of high pressure, will mostly be fine. Northern Ireland additionally, and for the far southeast and the far southeast, mostly avoiding the showers, but in between, some wet weather and heavy, slow-moving showers could cause some issues for East Wales, central and southern England during the rest of the day. Some large surface water accumulations on the roads, for example. Showers then drift northeast overnight, continuing to affect central and eastern Scotland for a time. 15 Celsius for Glasgow, 14 for London, so most places mid-teens and a more comfortable night for sleeping, I think, compared with earlier in the week. And in some spots, some sheltered areas, a fresh start with temperatures in the single figures first thing. Now, once any early showers in the east have cleared away, that's where we'll see the brightest skies during the afternoon. For many, the cloud thickens from the west, it turns breezy, and for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of England and Wales, we'll see spells of rain. Low 20s in the north and the west. I think 23 Celsius possible in the southeast with some sunshine. It will feel humid here, and it stays largely dry in East Anglia in the southeast overnight, whilst outbreaks of rain continue elsewhere. And actually, western and central Scotland will see the heaviest of the rain through the night, and with showers on and off elsewhere, it will be fairly unsettled for many. A milder night to come, though, with temperatures staying up into the high teens in a few spots, and then a relatively warm start to Sunday, but a cloudy start for many and a breezy start. Now, in the north and the west, we'll see further outbreaks of rain on and off through the day, even some thunderstorms for western Scotland, but the southeast stays dry and it'll be hot on Sunday with 30 Celsius possible. Monday and Tuesday sees cooler conditions.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little